It's October 2008. You've made it to the weekend, pizza has just been delivered and Fallout 3 has been released. Life is good. While exploring the capital wasteland for the first time, you come across a tunnel leading underground into the metro and decide to explore. As you head down, the ambience changes. The tunnels are darker and confusing, and then you hear it. The sound that still haunts you to this day. And from the shadows rushes a tide of ghouls. Trying to escape the horde, you end up in one of the claustrophobic utility tunnels, and as you press forward, you hear that noise again. That was a rather dramatic recreation of when I first encountered feral ghouls in the wasteland. Of course, there weren't huge masses of ghouls coming from every direction, but hearing them alert in the darkness as a kid definitely left me feeling that way. And even now, the metro in Fallout 3 creeps me out. Throughout the years, we've seen many different forms of ghouls, and with the release of Fallout 76's Ghoul update, we get to not just play as a ghoul, but also see a method of turning into one. This isn't technically the only time we've been able to play as a ghoul, but we'll get into that. So, today we'll be experiencing all things ghoulified, whether chemically induced, a side effect of radiation, or other darker methods. We'll explore everything, including some of the not quite ghouls like the ghost people. So, grab your Mothman blanket, settle in, and let's start, as always, back at the beginning. The best place to start in the original Fallout has to be the Necropolis, a city entirely made up of ghouls. Back before the bombs dropped, this lovely area was Bakersfield, and Vault-Tec built Vault 12 here, a vault that not only had the latest in Vault-Tec purification technology, something that would be important for the Vault Dweller, but also had a particularly dedicated group of residents who even earned the Pressed Vault Suit Award for their efforts at being prepared for the eventual bombs hitting. Unfortunately, as we all know, this is Vault-Tec, so we know things weren't planned for things to go smoothly, no matter how much the residents prepared. Nearly every vault, apart from the control vaults, is an experiment of some kind, and Vault 12 was all about radiation. Vault-Tec sabotaged the doors, making it so they would never actually close, allowing the radiation to seep into the shelter as Bakersfield was devastated by nuclear bombs. Those inside and on the surface either died or ghoulified. Eventually, those inside the vault left and joined those on the surface, founding the city of Necropolis, a city full of ghouls and radiation that is considered dangerous to smoothskins, with rumors of those going there never returning. Though, given the fact that most of the ghouls on the surface have all of their limbs crippled and can only shamble towards the Vault Dweller, they can be some easy XP for some long-range shooting. A select few smoothskin caravans do trade with them though, and the Vault Dweller can meet Set, the leader of the ghouls here. Set has seen better days, as have all the ghouls here to be honest. He's pretty brutal in his control of the area, which is where the rumors of people disappearing come from, but he's not above asking for help. A while ago, a super mutant contingent was sent by the Master to take the vault and bring back the Vault Dwellers who hadn't been affected by radiation. Unfortunately, upon encountering the ghouls, the super mutants thought they were monsters and began fighting. Set eventually managed to convince them they were sentient beings and that they were actually the Vault Dwellers they were looking for, albeit pretty irradiated at this point. Things have kind of settled into an uneasy truce when the Vault Dweller first arrives, and the super mutants have taken over the watershed, controlling the supply of water to keep the ghouls in line. Set asks the Vault Dweller to deal with them and repair the watershed pump so the ghouls have water. If the Vault Dweller does this, they can descend into Vault 12, meet some of the only sentient glowing ones in the entire series, and take the water chip, saving their own vault. The ghouls in the vault and the sewer are a peaceful faction, forced down there by Set but still sent water. Set doesn't like them, but he's afraid he wouldn't have enough men if they were attacked, so mostly tolerates their existence. They're mostly peaceful towards the Vault Dweller, asking them to fix the watershed, but if the Vault Dweller doesn't and instead actually just steals the water chip, the glowing ones will turn hostile. Which brings us to a very important point in the investigation. The ghouls here will then die of dehydration, which will become a point of contention as we go through the series. Some people turn into ghouls through regular radiation, and they still require food and water. We do have a ghoul in Fallout who had a different origin though. Everyone's favourite tree man Hardold was not always so stationary. In the original Fallout, we could meet him in Old Town, where he would tell us about himself and the Master. Hardold was one of the caravan bosses and made a good living until mutant attacks began to rise. The caravan could defend itself with enough guards, but there were still losses. Eventually, Hardold and several other notable figures, such as the man who would become the master, set out to find the source of all these mutants. They eventually found the Mariposa military base, a location that had been conducting the majority of the FEV experiments. After battling through hordes of mutants and a lethal security system that saw them as a threat, only Hardold and Grey made it into the FEV storage. And, after all of that, they were taken out by a robotic crane arm. Grey fell into the vats of FEV and would later become the master. Hardold was knocked unconscious and woke up in the desert, somehow, beginning to mutate due to his exposure to the FEV. None of Hardold's companions made it back, and he was too scared to return to that place to try and find them. Over time, Hardold turned more and more ghoulish, losing clients and friends until he moved into an abandoned building in Old Town, which is where the Vault Dweller can meet him for the first time. Also, just because it really tugged at my heartstrings and may be the only piece of sympathy you'll ever feel for the Master. Both Hardold and Grey thought the other was dead. Hardold saw Grey fall in the vats and assumed he died in them. But in a holotape we find, we can hear Grey say he must have been killed or he would have tried to help me. Grey is a terrible person even before his transformation. But here we actually see some humanity leaking through, and maybe things would have been different if Hardold hadn't been knocked out, or even went back for him. I might do a deep dive on the Master if people are interested in the future. Hardold is fairly unique throughout the games, both from his mutation and what he later becomes. We mentioned the Master wanting Vault Dwellers, people who hadn't been exposed to radiation. The reason for this is that most Wastelanders have been exposed to too much radiation. So when the FEV mutates them, it results in an increase in strength, but a lack of mental capabilities. The Master had come from a vault, and while he'd been out in the waste for a while, he reasoned his lower exposure compared to someone who lived on the surface all their life was why he retained and even increased his mental capabilities. Hardold was also from a vault and only spent a couple years more in the wasteland than the Master. He also had only a small amount of exposure to the FEV in comparison to the Master, who literally bathed in it. We can next meet Hardold in the Gecko City power plant. He's the foreman and trying to keep things ticking over. He also has a new companion called Bob, who's a little sapling sprouting out of Hardold's head that just kinda grew out of there. Gecko once again grew from a ghoul population that was rejected from everywhere else, all gravitating towards a source of radiation that no one else wanted to go near. Unfortunately, ghoulification isn't great for the old brain cells, and after years of mismanagement when Hardold arrives, things aren't in a great place. At one point, he has to step in as a ghoul has reported the coolant levels being too high, and they just want to shut off the coolant, leaving the reactor to overheat and go nuclear. The plant is also missing an important part that's slowly but surely polluting the water and ground nearby, creating friction with the nearby Vault City. Hardold is aware that the city could help them, but given the fact they shoot ghouls on sight, he's been unable to strike up trade with them. At the same time though, if he doesn't fix it, then they'll probably march in and take out all the ghouls anyway. The Chosen One can intervene, help Vault City get rid of the ghouls, or broker an agreement to encourage the ghouls and humans to work together. While trying to get Vault City to step down and help the ghouls, the Chosen One meets the Brain, a mole rat mutated through FEV who wants to take over the world. Brain has raised their own cult in Gecko, consisting of ghouls and glowing ones who want to return to humanity, find a way to turn back the clock on their mutation and just be human again. Of course, while Brain is mostly doing this to further their goals of taking over the world, part of them helping is to attain Vault City's medical knowledge to see if there is a way to cure ghoulification, though sadly we never find out if they're successful. Given that we again meet Hardold in Fallout 3, it's unlikely that they did find a cure. Maybe it's due to Hardold being a result of FEV and not just radiation, but he'd probably mention it at least. And when we do meet him again, Hardold is looking a bit different. After the events of Fallout 2, Hardold once again set off on a journey into the Wastelands. Maybe looking for more lost souls he could help, or simply because he didn't want to stay in one place. Either way, the choice would be taken from him. Bob, the little sapling sprouting out of Hardold, continued to grow till it was becoming too much for Hardold to bear. And when settling down to rest one day, he awoke unable to move. Bob had taken root and trapped Hardold there, leaving him nothing to do but wait. Over the years, Bob dispersed Hardold's internal organs till there was no way to remove Hardold from the tree, and he spent his time spreading Bob's seed around himself to both amuse and try and entice people to find him. Eventually, a wanderer who would later take the name Birch found Hardold and started a cult to protect him. Bob produced incredibly hardy fruit that was able to take root and thrive in the harshest of conditions, creating a spot of green paradise in an otherwise barren wasteland. Hardold's predicament eventually led to him wanting to just end everything. When he asks Birch though, Birch just sees it as a test and carries on doing what he's been doing. Hardold carried on trying to attract more wastelanders, but every time they arrived as part of the purification ritual, Birch made them drink a hallucinogenic sap derived from Bob. It made people either go insane, or at the very least when they came out of the trip and saw Hardold there being part tree, they would run screaming. Eventually, the lone wanderer finds them and is given several choices. Finally end Hardold's long years of boredom and torment, leave him contained to this one area, or help him spread across the wasteland. It's worth noting as well that the trees spreading from him seem to be part of him as well. He mentions seeing the lone wanderer approach through the leaves of the other trees, though this makes Bob get jealous. Maybe eventually he'd disperse his consciousness among all the trees if he spread enough, and become similar to a kind of nature god. Though, given his lack of agency, that may be condemning one of the nicest characters in the Fallout universe to a fate worse than death. While writing this, it actually kind of struck me what perfect opposites Hardold and the Master are, and shows that maybe mentality has an effect on the direction mutations take. Also, completely submerging may have had some effect on it. The Master was a murderer before ever even meeting Hardold, and his mutation and merging with computer parts seems to represent the darker parts of humanity, with technology having caused the end of the world and his army driving life on Earth towards an even darker future as an amalgamation of twisted flesh. Hardold, however, is always shown to be kind and understanding. For example, if the player in Fallout 1 has a low int stat, most people don't even want to interact with you. But Hardold shows concern and compassion, maybe due to the scorn people showed him when he mutated. But either way, he tries to help others, and he doesn't choose this, but when he amalgamates, it's with a seed, a sprout of life, that ultimately brought new life to the wasteland. I just thought it was interesting to see the difference between these two characters. As a side mention, Hardold did also turn up in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, though this game has been confirmed by Todd Howard and Interplay employees on the old forums as being a different continuity of Fallout, so nothing in it is fully canon to the main Fallout games. In it, you meet Hardold, who has lost a few body parts, an arm, an eye, and a toe. He just wants you to collect them so that he can pop them right back on, which actually is a thing that ghouls can do. Over in Fallout 3, we can visit the Underworld, DC's City of Ghouls, a place where they can exist without the prejudice of literally every other group. Inside, we can meet a lot of interesting characters, but let's start with the town drunk. Patchwork, or Patches, as his friends would call him if he had any, spends most of his time so inebriated that he's constantly slurring his words. Most of the city ignore him and treat him like he doesn't exist, and he's actually confused when the lone wanderer actually talks to him. He's quite happy with the title of Town Drunk and asserts that he'd spend a lot more time crying if he wasn't as drunk as he always was. He'll mention how the others make him hurt himself sometimes, and that if the lone wanderer spots any body parts lying around, they're probably his. He's constantly losing them, and then Dr. Barrows has to help him and find them and sew them back on. Last week he lost a finger, and the lone wanderer can even hear him talking to Cerberus, asking him if he's seen any toes lying around anywhere. It's actually how he got his name Patchwork. He kept losing body parts and getting sewn back together until he became just a patchwork of parts. We don't know how long he's been here, and despite the fact that it's common that he loses parts and has them sewn back on, all of his body parts seem to be there and nothing looks rotten, or any more rotten than is usual for a ghoul anyways. We mentioned Dr. Barrows there. He's the owner of the Chop Shop, the Underworld's resident doctor and de facto mayor. That's secondary to his real research though. He's currently working on a way to prevent ghoulification and eventually to turn someone back. He has plenty of ghouls to research and even has some glowing ones locked away, but he's always in desperate need of human samples. Occasionally he'll get the chance to take hair, skin, or even organs from humans, though he does have a moral code and won't just take what he needs. He takes his oath seriously and even states that if a super mutant came through the door needing healing, it'd be his job to heal them. Unfortunately, we don't ever get much insight to his research or what stage he's at, other than the fact he says he's the foremost authority on ghouls. While in the underworld, we can rent a room and get some food at Carol's place. And if we're nice to Carol, she'll give us a first-hand report of how life was as the bombs dropped and how she became a ghoul. Carol was a little girl when she first entered what would become the underworld, which does raise questions about how ghouls age, but we have no idea how long it was before she started changing. She just mentions that it was sometime after things on the surface calmed down. I mean, who knows how long people were looting and burning the city down. We do know that it was up to a year for the transformation and that the city was on fire for potentially months. It could be that she carried on growing for some time and was kept in an ageless stasis like other ghouls. Or maybe she isn't remembering her age well. 200 years is a long time to remember something, especially when ghouls are shown to have degrading mental faculties. Plus, to someone over 200 years old, I'm sure even a 20-year-old is just a child. Add that on top of the fact that we can only tell she isn't a child by her height because most of her features are rotted away. She does also bring up an interesting social dynamic though. According to her, ghouls aren't capable of procreating anymore, and so she took Gob in as her son. Gob has left home, and while traveling ended up in Megaton, where he is basically a slave now. I don't think there's a better representation of how a lot of people treat ghouls than Gob. Gob is always nervous, expecting to be beaten at any moment. He set out from Underworld to explore the world and somehow ended up being caught by slavers. They sold him to Moriarty 15 years ago and he's been working off his debt ever since. Seeing as he's charged for food and board though, it doesn't seem he'll be free anytime soon. Gob is forced to be polite and welcoming to customers, but is almost constantly on the verge of begging them not to hurt him, due to the way Moriarty treats him. If the Lone Wanderer shows him even the littlest of kindness, he'll be prepared to risk Moriarty's wrath by giving the Lone Wanderer a discount, and he'll even be excited to see the Lone Wanderer. You can tell Carol about his predicament, but she just wants him to stay where it's safe rather than travel again. Though, if you happen to erase Megaton from the map, it's not such a safe place. You can even brag to Carol that you did it, which results in most of Underworld turning aggressive, and it's just kind of an ass move, honestly. One last thing to mention about Carol is her depression. Ever since Gob left, she's been getting more depressed and it's affecting her sleep, resulting in brain fog and forgetfulness. Her partner Greta has noticed, and so have the customers. Ahzrukhal even has plans to get rid of Greta so he can hook Carol on some of his special stock. Ahzrukhal is one of the few very evil characters in Fallout 3, and has a couple other interesting rabbit holes to go down. For a start, he sells Jet to Snowflake, the local ghoul hairdresser. If the Lone Wanderer asks him about his Jet usage...
I just sharpened the knives. Have a seat and we'll give you a new look. Well, yeah. So, what else do I have to do to except get high? You think that I need to be sober to cut a ghoul's hair? Half the work is cutting the skin off. These guys don't care how they look anyway. They just humor me.
I'd definitely think twice about letting him near my head with a sharp implement, but we don't know how much the jet actually affects him. Over at Northwest Seneca Station, we can meet Murphy, the ghoul scientist. He's been working on Ultra Jet, a much stronger version of Jet that'll affect ghouls like Jet does for regular folks, as it barely has any effect on ghouls. It takes 3 things to make Ultra Jet. He has 2 of them, one of which is likely the Braxo cleaner that is all over the place. And the thing he's missing is sugar bombs. You know, the healthiest breakfast cereal around. Unless, you know, you use it to make mega drugs or add it to some fuel and make a bomb. But going back to Ahzrukhal, you may have noticed his ever-present loyal guard in the corner. Karen was brainwashed by a group that we don't know about and will obey anyone who holds his contract, no matter how badly he wants to kill them. What's more interesting to us right now, though, is his inability to sleep. Fallout 3 Game Guide has this to say about him. Karen is Ahzrukhal's personal bodyguard and soldier. He's quiet and scary. Every couple of days, Ahzrukhal sends Karen out to run some kind of errand. He always leaves packed with weaponry and returns with a bag of cats. He's loyal to Ahzrukhal beyond question and will do whatever his employer orders. Karen never sleeps, a strange trait even for a ghoul. and when he's in Underworld, he hangs out in the bar. There are rumours that he is unhappy with his position but can't leave Ahzrukhal's employ. Which is interesting, as it's highly hinted at that the fact Carol isn't sleeping is part of what's affecting her mental faculties. Yet Karen never sleeps, and despite his standoffish demeanour and need to serve an employer, he doesn't seem any worse off than most ghouls. After the events of the original story of Fallout 3, with the water purifier being activated and the Broken Steel DLC installed, the Lone Wanderer could carry out their journey and eventually bump into the Holy Light Monastery. The people here are an offshoot of Megaton's Holy Atom Church, but rather than seeking division, which essentially means going to heaven in a holy conflagration of nuclear fire, they instead seek enlightenment. Mother Curie, the head of this church, was part of the original Atomite church, until one day she had a vision from Atom himself, telling her that they must seek enlightenment and accept Atom's gift, Ghoulification. So, Curie convinced others of the church and they left and set up this new church in Springvale to start spreading the news and helping people. One day, while meditating, Curie was approached by 4 armored angels who bestowed upon her water and a mission to help everyone. So, obviously, Curie began irradiating the water and handing it out to people. Of course, these were no angels, but the Brotherhood of Steel handing out Aqua Pura. This shipment was intended for Megaton, but Curie has things twisted with her religious dogma and genuinely believes she's saving the wasteland and all those in it. We can see how committed she is to this role just by looking at her son, the shining son of Atom. She irradiated him until he became a glowing one, who is actually peaceful, and we find out why in the official game guide. When a human transcends mortality and straddles the ether, they can be seen to be both living in the real and spiritual realm. Mother Curie III firmly believes her own son to have taken the final steps on this journey. In fact, much of her son's higher functions have disappeared, and only instinct is preventing this confused glowing one from attacking. Something similar is said about Atom's champion, another friendly feral ghoul who still has some small vestiges of functioning brain matter. The only thing currently stopping them from attacking is time. Time for those instincts to degrade, and time for those last few brain cells to be eaten away by the radiation. It is interesting as well that the Lone Wanderer can actually impersonate Atom during this quest. All they have to do is become so irradiated that they begin glowing, and Curie will believe them to be Atom, as no normal person could take that much radiation without being overcome. Obviously, Curie has never heard of plot armor. Honestly, the religion of Atom is really interesting, and if there is interest, could be worth an entire video in its own right. Over on Point Lookout, we've talked about the brain before, but never looked much into Desmond. Well, the Fallout game guide has this to say about him. Desmond the Ghoul. Desmond was a player in international intelligence at the highest levels. Desmond's motives and obsessions have been scarcely affected by the apocalyptic devastation of the planet. Desmond, and those he would consider his peers, knew for some time that the Great War was inevitable. Desmond himself could have been directly involved in the actions leading up to the nuclear exchange. Facing the nuclear holocaust, global leaders and members of the intelligence community made their personal bids for survival in the new world. FEV, cryogenic stasis, AI consciousness, even, in Desmond's case, controlled exposure to normally lethal doses of radiation were among the wildly risky and experimental techniques pursued in the names of survival in a world without modern infrastructure. Old rivalries and vendettas were not forgotten in the ashes of nuclear winter. Those who managed to survive quickly set about doing what the bombs had not, wiping out any remnants of the old world that may be a threat to personal and political agendas. Now, even so long after they should have all died, naturally, these scattered figures seek power and jealously guard their secrets. Desmond's mission has long since ceased to be political or ideological. He knew, as experience has proven tenfold, that as long as any of his colleagues lived, he would be hunted. His purpose is simple: kill or be killed. He actually was created as a ghoul, using controlled radiation in large doses. We're starting to see that this was something people knew about pre-war, even if it was extremely risky. We can actually see more of the blatant hatred of ghouls at Tenpenny Tower as well. When you first approach, Roy Phillips will be trying to gain entry for him and his ghoul friends. The residents aren't too happy about that, and most of them want you to eliminate the threat. Now, you have a couple of ways to deal with this quest. You can talk to Roy and try and convince the residents that ghouls will be friendly and they don't need to worry about them going feral or murdering everyone. If you do choose this path though and manage to actually convince the residents, then eventually when you return, Roy will tell you they had a disagreement and they did actually in fact murder all of the human residents. So maybe not the best choice. And finally, you can choose to help let Roy and his ferals in the building to kill all the residents and take over the building. What's interesting about this route though is that once you've opened the path in the basement, Roy will meet you out front and give you a ghoul mask that makes the ferals think you're one of them. While wearing the mask, no feral ghoul will be hostile unless you attack, which is interesting. The ghoul mask is made from several pieces of feral ghoul skin that have been sewn together, meaning the ferals are recognizing either the change in appearance, some kind of change to the skin after being irradiated for that long, or maybe even just the remnant radiation left on the skin. Either way, it's interesting to see how they recognize friend from foe, even with most of their brains fried. Next, we have something a bit different. Into the Pit and later Fallout 76's expeditions have a unique enemy type called Troggs, degenerated humans that attack on sight. These Troggs were once humans, but the very air of the pit is toxic. Before the war, Pittsburgh was a major industrial powerhouse in America, which made it a target for the Chinese. The resulting combination of radiation and toxic waste have created a disease unique to the pit. Troglytic degeneration contagion, or TDC for short, affects nearly everyone who enters the pit. The symptoms can be as mild as some skin lesions or maybe a mutation like a sick toe, but for around 20% of the victims, this disease progresses further, first affecting the mind and causing them to become more violent, like the wild men. They eventually degenerate into a Trogg, attacking friends and foes alike. Though some say they do recognize loved ones, this is most likely a hopeful myth. The infection rate on any younglings born into the pit is also 100%, apart from the one unique case, Marie, who may also be the only chance of a cure. While these aren't technically ghouls, the approach to turning is similar. Requiring a large amount of radiation and some pollutants, only 20% fully turn. And we also know the ghoulification process also doesn't have a 100% success rate. Maybe without the industrial pollutants, these individuals who turned would have become ghouls from the same amount of radiation. Finally, in Fallout 3, let's talk about something a bit more eldritch. Dunwich Building is a memorable place for anyone who stumbled upon it. Items move with a will of their own, doors open and close, and the lone wanderer experiences visions of the past. Down in the very caverns below this building is an obelisk to quoltoth, an old god with a peculiar effect. Now, I've done a video detailing all those old gods of Fallout you can find here, but what we're interested in for this video is the effect quoltoth has on humans. You see, going through these buildings, we could find tapes and terminal entries from Jamie, a kid just trying to find his dad. His dad found a book during an expedition and brought it to the Brotherhood, thinking he could make some caps. When they didn't want it, he began to follow its whispers, leaving Jamie behind and eventually heading to the Dunwich building. Jamie tracked him all the way here and found the book, along with his father as a feral ghoul. Having the book and being near the obelisk changes Jamie though, and we get this amazing holotape.
Can't forget the book. All I have left of him. It's warm against the stone. I'll just rest a while.
The obelisk does give off some radiation, but at a rate of only 1 rad a second, and we have to be extremely close. Maybe quoltoth can extend the range, or there's something more in this location that turns people into ghouls. Now, come fly with me while we head over to New Vegas and some ghouls trying to head to space. At the Repcon test site, we can meet Jason Bright, prophet of the Bright Brotherhood, and one of the only friendly and talkative glowing ones we'll ever meet. Jason is the prophet of the Creator, who's shown him multiple visions of the far beyond, a place where ghouls could be safe and heal, a paradise far away from the bigotry of humans towards his kind.
We wish to escape the barbarity of the wasteland, especially the violence, bigotry of its human inhabitants. The Creator has promised to my flock a new land, a place of safety and healing, a paradise in the far beyond. Preparations for the great journey were nearly complete when the demons appeared.
Jason intends to get there by repairing several rockets and flying out to the far beyond. where the radiation will be harsher, but as ghouls, they'll be okay. While he has the vision and the plan, Jason isn't the kind of expert needed to repair old pre-war rockets. So in steps our tragic hero, Chris Havisham. Chris was from Vault 34 and he was maintaining the reactor there until he left because he began to ghoulify, starting with his hair falling out. He eventually found the Bright Brotherhood and joined them using his engineering expertise to repair the rockets. The only problem is, Chris is still human. He did work on the reactor in Vault 34 and his hair did fall out, most likely due to male pattern baldness than anything else, but this caused him to believe he was a monster. He's even developed the ghoul's unique way of talking, but he is still human.
Haverson won't mind getting irradiated. Haverson won't mind mutating. He's already ugly as it is.
Jason has tried convincing him, but eventually has let him work for them, as he was clearly sent by the creator to help. You can help him realize this, and he'll ask you to sabotage the rockets with sugar bombs for some explosive results. Or you can help him forgive them and send them off to the great beyond. Ironically, when he left, the reactor actually did melt down, flooding the place with radiation and turning those that survived into ghouls, whether just paranoia or clairvoyance. Either way, it actually saved Chris's life. While playing New Vegas, you've most likely encountered Obsidian's attempt to teach you about greed and letting go. Of course, all it actually did was make people get creative about how to steal gold. But what we're looking at today in the Sierra Madre are the ghost people. While not technically ghouls, they're fairly similar. Big Mountain had a contract with the owner Frederick Sinclair for running experiments in the Sierra Madre, which started off with testing a toxic gas. Due to Frederick cutting corners as he was nearing bankruptcy, the ventilation system was not well maintained, and eventually the gas, what we know as the cloud, started to spew forth. Frederick negotiated with Big Mountain for another experimental tech, the chemical hazmat suit, but didn't realize this was just another experiment to the Big MT executives. Those that entered the fog in the new suits found the latches to corrode, locking them inside as the gas began to fill the suits. Eventually, they managed to cut the suit off with some cosmic steak knives, much to the Doctor's displeasure. After the war, the cloud grew to envelop the entire area, keeping it safe from outsiders. But those inside seemed to have donned the chemical suits to try and survive. Unfortunately, they did. Just not how they wanted to. The gas once again corroded the locks, so those inside are unable to escape and the suits are full of the gas. When shot or stabbed, the gas will leak out and it appears to have enormous regenerative abilities. Not only has it kept these people alive since the war, but the only way to stop them is dismemberment or disintegration. Otherwise, they'll just keep getting back up, healing from whatever you've done to them. It would be interesting to see if, like ghouls, they're capable of reattaching those lost limbs. Given their regenerative abilities, I would assume so. Obviously, this just wasn't within scope of the game engine at the time. They don't appear to be sane, attacking anyone on sight apart from the holograms that they appear to worship. But they also don't seem fully feral, capable of using weapons and even setting up traps. It may be as Domino says, without a goal, something to focus on to get through the day, they lost their mind as the gas wouldn't let them pass on. Now they're stuck like this, and it would appear that given they can't remove the suit, they also just subsist off of the gas. Maybe its incredible regenerative abilities remove the need for sustenance. For our next group of ghouls, we'll be visiting another New Vegas DLC, and the Courier's own dark past. In the Lonesome Road DLC, we find out that before the events of Fallout New Vegas, the Courier made multiple trips out into a place now called the Divide. They supported a growing community that could even come to be as powerful as the NCR or Caesar. This, however, wasn't okay with either side, and so they descended and began fighting over the location until one day, the Courier delivered a parcel that would destroy everything. They'd been given it by the NCR, and as was usual for them, after delivering it, they went off on another job with no idea that they'd doomed everybody. The device had the launch codes for all of the hidden nukes under the Divide, old war relics that had been sleeping until the codes were sent activating them. Buried underground, they launched and collided with the top of the silos, causing the Divide to become what it is today. The nuclear wind makes this place inhospitable for nearly everyone. In fact, many were wiped out completely, but some did survive. Most of those who did became the marked men. Mutating from the radiation, they ghoulified, but with a few distinct differences. The wind in the Divide is brutal, unrelenting, and strong enough to scrape off skin, and that's exactly what it did. The marked men have no skin. Their forms are made of exposed muscle, the regeneration from being a ghoul keeping them alive, but anytime they manage to regrow any skin, it's just torn off again, leaving them in a state of eternal torment and pain. The other difference may even be a result of this torment. The marked men aren't quite feral, but they also don't seem as cognizant as a regular ghoul. Despite being from opposing armies once, now the NCR and Legion can be seen fighting any outsiders together, and they still use weapons as well. They also have absolutely no interest in communication with outsiders. It may just be they're like regular ghouls, but the constant pain of having their flesh ripped off and their muscles sanded down has caused them to lose their mind, or, as they were all irradiated at the same time, they are all in the same state or close to it of becoming feral. Maybe if the courier had waited a bit longer before chasing Ulysses, then everyone on this road would have become feral and much easier to deal with. Though we've not seen what causes people to become feral, and it doesn't seem to just be a time thing. So, who knows why they're all this way? I think they just lost it from the constant suffering. One other group to note from New Vegas are the poor and unfortunate souls at Little Yangtze and Big MT. Due to the war, America rounded up their own Chinese citizens and sent them to camps. Most were typically operated by the government, but some, like Little Yangtze, were used by corporations. This one was for containing test subjects, primarily for robo-brain research. Due to the sheer number of prisoners, escape attempts were constant, until they decided to place bomb collars on everyone. If they left the perimeter, their heads would explode, which is exactly where we find them. Left behind by the military, the radiation ghoulified them, but they were still unable to leave due to the collars. For 200 years, they've had no food or water, potentially feasting on any lobotomites that wander into their cage. Or, possibly, given the numbers that were said to be here, maybe cannibalism. Though it's worth noting that some may have escaped, as up in the hills we can find some of the prisoners dressed the same way, with collars on, but somehow still intact. Maybe it's just the remnants who couldn't escape left in the camp. Fallout 4 has a lot of ghouls who carry on this theme of isolation and starvation. Take for example the Gibbons. They can be found in their bunker on Cranberry Island Bog. When the bombs dropped, those who were home all ran into their bunker, but due to a malfunction, the doors stopped working once they were inside, trapping them. Over time, radiation trickled in and turned everyone inside into a ghoul. And when we arrive, they're all feral as well. Locked in a box for 200 years, they most likely ran out of supplies. Not everyone locked in a box loses it and becomes feral though. So, of course, we need to talk about the kid in the fridge. Kid in a fridge is one of those quests that has caused countless arguments. You see, while wandering the wastes, you may stumble upon a fridge with a child shouting for help. Upon letting them out, you meet Billy the kid. When he heard explosions, he hid inside the fridge, surviving, but it locked on him, and there was no handle on the inside. Locked inside, Billy ate everything. A long time ago. The sole survivor can promise to take the kid home to Quincy, where we'll actually meet his parents, both still alive and ghoulified, which shocked Billy. He hasn't seen them since they turned. His dad says they were just lucky that they all turned instead of dying from radiation sickness. Of course, you can also take the evil route and sell Billy. Soon after saving him from the fridge, the sole survivor will be met by Bullet, who wants to buy the kid.
Cute kid. Is he for sale?
What's a ghoul child worth?
Hey, you can't sell me.
Plenty. I'll give you 200 caps. Ghouls are immune to radiation, don't age, and don't need to eat. You can work them real hard.
which, given what we've seen so far, could go either way. Some ghouls appear to not need food, others definitely do. Billy has been in a fridge for 200 years though, so maybe he doesn't need food? Billy is also unique, not in surviving in the fridge, that surprisingly happens more than once in the series, but by being a ghoul child. We mentioned earlier about Carol being a child when the bombs dropped, but she's an adult now. Billy is still a child 200 years later, and may be cursed to live in a child's body for eternity, or until someone sells him. This could be a difference in mutation or environment. Somehow his body didn't grow as it knew there wasn't enough space within the fridge for him to grow. Maybe now he's out, he'll mature, or it could just be that he was never going to grow up and he's stuck like this. After that, let's look at something a bit brighter, or at least pinker. Before the war, Jackie Hudson, the principal for Suffolk County Charter School, made a deal with Vault-Tec and the government. In exchange for more funding, all students would be required to eat a new pink paste that Vault-Tec was developing. All outside food was banned from the school, and it became mandatory to eat the paste. The decision was made without consulting anyone else, not staff, student, or parent, and so the news was met with resistance. Unfortunately for all involved, Jackie persevered with the experiment, and they soon started encountering side effects. The behavior of the children grew worse, more aggressive, and everyone started to become a little bit more pink. We can even find some raiders out in the wastes who started taking this stuff and had to have an intervention because one of them started becoming too violent. Hank, you've been eating a lot of that food paste that we got from the Suffolk school. It's affecting you, like in a real bad way, man. You've been flying off the handle at every little thing. Always have this crazy look in your eyes. Heck, during that last farm raid, you even shot up a couple runners. We don't kill them when they're fleeing, man. We're better than that. I know the stuff tastes great, but is it really worth all this? I mean, I had to write this down because I'm scared you would shoot me in the face if I said anything in person. We're your friends. We just don't want to see you go down the wrong path. Just drop the paste, man. Seeing as they're all dead, though, I'm guessing it didn't go well. Though, Jackie also just denies all of this.
Happy Friday all. The NAPP program launched this week with success, but not without problems. I hate to have to throw away your mother's carefully packed lunches, but I am afraid we must put our foot down on this issue. I am assured all of you will get used to the flavor of the paste. Also, I have been informed that flavor varieties will be on their way pending continued success of the program. How exciting! To those complaining, I will repeat. There are absolutely no psychological or physical side effects from participation in the NAPP. Any observed effect is assuredly psychosomatic, and possibly related to a lack of trust in the government. Remember, our participation in the NAPP not only helps our school, but in the long run benefits our nation. Thank you for your attention. This is Principal Hudson, signing off.
In the school, we can find possibly the remnants of the students and teachers. The first time the Lone Wanderer enters the building, it will be full of ghouls, who are a bit more pink than we're used to. Whether they were remnants of the people eating the paste before they changed, or just ghouls that wandered in and began feeding on the pink slop, is up for debate. Also, due to ferals being extremely aggressive, we can't see a difference between regular aggression and pink paste aggression. All we do know is we should be careful eating the stuff ourselves. Now, everyone knows our favourite detective synth, Nick Valentine, whose personality comes from a pre-war detective, whose last and greatest case was Eddie Winter, a crime kingpin in Boston. Unfortunately, after compiling the evidence and catching him, the Bureau of Alcohol, Drugs, Tobacco, Firearms and Lasers gave him a deal. If he turned over all the other big-time players, then he'd get to walk free. This broke Nick, and as part of a therapy process, he had his brain scanned, which resulted in the Nick we work with today. But 200 years later, Eddie is still around.
Claire, it's me, Eddie. It's been too long, I know. But I'm okay. We're okay. I know it's weird me disappearing just when the heat died down, but there's a reason. What we talked about, it's happening soon. Bombs, missiles, I don't know what, but the end is coming. I can't even tell you how much I paid my cloak and dagger friend for this info. So I guess me building that shelter was a smart idea after all, huh? But look, baby, there is one more thing. The reason I haven't been around for a while. You know those idiot brothers at Wicked Shipping? The ones smuggling the radioactive material? I put the screws to them. Got some of the stuff. I've been working with this doctor in East Boston. Guy's a fucking genius. Listen, I know it sounds crazy, but he had this theory. The right kind of radiation exposure at the right amounts, it can change human cells. Mutate them. Baby, I can live forever. Yeah, I know, it could kill me. I'm willing to chance it, but I can't risk losing you. So I'm the guinea pig. And I've been getting treatments. But don't worry, I'm fine. More than fine. I feel great. Amazing, even. I think this crazy shit's really working. Eventually, this war will blow over. And when it does, I'm gonna walk out to Boston and pick up where I left off. I'm gonna own the future. I'm assuming you'll be dead by then, of course. But let's not dwell on the negative. So look, you come to the sub shop tomorrow night. You and I will go into the shelter together. Seal it up and wait for the big kaboom. Just, you might want to prepare yourself a little. Mentally and such. I look a little different now. But love is only skin deep, right?
He found a way to avoid dying, and it was through ghoulification pre-war. Again, mostly using radiation, but who knows what else the scientist was using on him. It sounds like it was just small doses of radiation to slowly mutate his cells. He's not the only one in Fallout 4 that we find using radiation to turn as well, though the next one doesn't go as well. In an abandoned house in Charlestown, we can find tapes left behind by research assistant Peters. Working on a way to combat radiation poisoning, Peters was themselves the test subject, and well, it's best to hear it from them.
Entry 3, recorded by research assistant Peters on February 26, 2077. Time, it's 12:35 hours. Subject's direct radiation exposure level increased to 2 sieverts per 24 hours. Intravenous fluid intake increased to 1 liter. Subject reports localized pain in frontal and parietal lobe, accompanied by severe nausea, with vomiting on average 3 to 6 instances per 12 hours. Solid food no longer viable by oral intake. Other symptoms include general weakness in limbs, bleeding of gums, severe abdominal cramps, and diarrhea. Dark stool indicates possibility of intestinal bleeding. Shortness of breath also an issue. I will now describe changes in mood or thought process. I have never in my life felt as horrible as I do right now. The discomfort is almost too much to bear. I often contemplate termination of this trial. But I know it'll only be a few more days before I reach 6 sieverts. Then I can administer the serum. We'll get our contract renewed. The serum will go to the market, and it's going to help people. It's really going to change the way we live. And me, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Cyclical thoughts. No other developments to report. Entry 6, R.A. Peters. It's March 1st. The subject has reached saturation threshold safely. Taking measurement now. Confirm 6 sieverts. Rapid fluid loss due to fever. Upped IV intake. All previous symptoms are still present. Tissue damage visible on arms, neck and hands. Necrotic sloughing of the skin. Topical and ingested antibiotics applied to control infection. Now injecting first dose of serum sample 42BA7 into bloodstream. No immediate effects observed. Animal trials yielded results in less than... effect. No effect. I contacted the lab to terminate this trial, but I need a doctor. Hang on. What's that? Oh, my teeth. Oh, several teeth dislodged. Feels like necrotic tissue damage throughout oral cavity. Serum is ineffective at toxic levels. Request to terminate trial was... Orders are to remain in quarantine for the duration of the experimental period. I understand. I'm going to die. That's obvious. It's right here. Our failure. If you would, Dr. Roberts, please deliver the following to my family. Mom, Dad, I love you. Yes, I volunteered for this. It sounds crazy, but I believed in it. Probably nothing left worth bearing. Just know no, that's a bit too sentimental. Let me think about it.
The change seems to have been a painful process for them, and if we search the house, we can find a glowing one still locked away after all this time. Fallout 4 also had a glowing one who was sentient, Oswald the Outrageous. When the bombs began falling, Oswald and a group of survivors took shelter in Kiddie Kingdom in Nuka World. As the world began to fall into chaos and raiders rose up, they rigged the sprinkler system to spray irradiated water everywhere. This worked, but over time it turned them into ghouls, and eventually they had to begin locking up the ferals. Now Oswald is the only one with any grasp of his mental faculties, and the area is full of ferals that he sees as his family. We do actually get an interesting terminal from him about a glowing one's capability though. There was a big attack today and Dean got hit by a stray bullet. The thought of losing another of us caused me to snap, and suddenly it was as though energy was literally flowing from my body. Then Dean just shot up and gasped for air. I healed him, but I have no idea how. After the attack it hit me. Was this some sort of mutation, or was it real magic? I mean, given the circumstances, who could tell the difference? Even if we had a scientific explanation, does that really make it any less magical? Regardless of what I want to call it, maybe I can use my powers to help the afflicted. Obviously it's not magic, but this is the first time anyone has actually talked about the glowing one's abilities to heal, and even seemingly resurrect ghouls. Oswald is just here protecting his family, waiting for his lover Rachel to return with a cure. Unfortunately, the lone survivor can find her body, and she didn't find any kind of cure. And as it's part of the Evil DLC, the only way to leave Oswald in peace is just to not complete it. Finally, in Fallout 4, we have another Dunwich location, the Dunwich Borers. Taken over by a raider gang, as you delve deeper, eventually it's filled with just feral ghouls. And at the very bottom you see a vision of the past. A sacrifice being carried out before coming back to the present and seeing all of those people now as ghouls. And where the altar was, is a pit into the earth with an eye staring up. It's fairly heavily implied that once again those who were here were transformed into ghouls through the presence of something eldritch. Now, we have one more piece of media to dive into before we reach 76. The Fallout TV show did pretty well for itself, winning the Game Award for Best Adaptation, but caused quite a few arguments online, especially about the ghoul. Born before the Great War, we haven't seen how he mutated yet. I'm assuming those flashbacks will be coming in Season 2 and may discredit any theories I have about him. So, as usual, we may be donning our tinfoil hats. The ghoul brought up something we haven't seen before, a dependency on a chem. It's never explained much other than ghouls need it. When he meets an old acquaintance who's turning, all they need is one vial to keep them from turning feral. When the ghoul runs out of said vials, he begins collapsing, unable to breathe. Also, we do actually see a couple of ghouls on the point of turning, and it's thoroughly depressing. They can feel their minds slipping, and all they can do is try and remind themselves of who they were by repeating their names, until even those final vestiges of humanity slip away, and they attack even their own savior. It's incredibly sad watching them wrestle with their own mind before it's all gone, and I really hate to say it, but it does reinforce some of the bigotry that places like Tenpenny Tower have. At least with the newer ghouls, if they hit hard times or there's a shortage in the supply of the vials, then they could be a ticking bomb waiting to go off and rip your throat out. We'll talk about the vials in a moment, but first I just want to mention some other behaviours that the ghoul exhibits as well. First off, he does show ghouls to be capable of reattaching body parts. When Lucy bites his finger off, he calmly sews it back on later on. Though Lucy also has someone else's finger attached to her own missing one, and she isn't a ghoul, I'm actually very surprised that worked as well as it did. We also see the ghoul drinking a lot. They're in a desert most of the time. He probably needs it to keep from crisping up even more. And when he does encounter his friend who's going feral, after putting him down, he begins carving up his ass to make, and I quote, ass jerky.
Ass jerky don't make itself.
I'm not sure if he needs sustenance or he's just a psychopath who's a cannibal on the side. It could go either way. We do see someone in the midst of transforming into a ghoul, or at least the very early stages. Thaddeus becomes Maximus's squire, believing him to be Sir Titus. After finding out the truth, the two fight and Maximus crushes Thaddeus's foot before Thaddeus is able to remove the power core from the suit, leaving Maximus in his own coffin. Thaddeus's foot is a mess though after this, and when he meets the snake oil salesman, he agrees to pay the price when he's told that he could heal his foot. The salesman mixes up a concoction that's yellow in colour and gives Thaddeus it in an inhaler. The effects are fairly instant, immediately healing his foot back to normal. But before leaving, the salesman also hints that Thaddeus no longer needs to worry about radiation. Later, when confronted by Lucy and Maximus, Thaddeus gets an arrow through the neck. Pulling it out, his blood is thick and barely runs before his neck completely heals up. At which point, Maximus says he thinks he's turning into a ghoul. It could be that Thaddeus is turning into a ghoul, or maybe even a super mutant, or some other mutation. But given the heavy focus on ghouls in the show, and the fact that the yellow mixture the salesman creates looks an awful lot like the vials the ghoul uses to stave off becoming feral, I think for now it's fair to assume that it's the same stuff, and can turn someone into a ghoul as well as stopping them from turning feral. Maybe the regenerative properties seen in Thaddeus work on the brain of a ghoul, stopping it from degenerating and turning them into a feral. It certainly doesn't do much for their skin like we see with Thaddeus. Which would be where this ends, if not for the new update in Fallout 76, the Ghoul Within, actually allowing players to become a ghoul for not quite the first time. But we don't talk about Kane. Meeting Lemon Price, who was ambushed by masked bandits, you find out his bullet wound is only a scratch, but he also has something terminal, caused by the radiation from his day-to-day job working in an irradiated mine. Luckily, the doctor has heard of a radiation specialist up on the hill, so you can meet Lemon up there, where he's held at gunpoint by a ghoul, who was leader of the gang that actually took out Lemon's friends. Things are getting tense before Parthenia Blankenship walks in and begins trying to convince Lemon to become a ghoul. While he mulls it over, she's missing one final piece for her mixture, which is just some irradiated ore from the nearby mine. After returning with the ore, you can help Lemon make his decision on whether to die a human or become a ghoul and survive. Following this quest, Parthenia will talk to the player about becoming a ghoul themselves. If they accept, the process is very simple. All they need to do is use the inhaler with her Ghoulification mixture, and then go and soak in a ton of rads from the nearby nuclear warhead. Afterwards, they wake up having completely turned into a ghoul. While there is a way of turning back and forth through spending atoms, the in-game currency, this is only for mechanics, and in canon, the change is irreversible. It does, however, come with some perks. For example, radiation now makes you stronger. However, some factions will also attack you on sight unless you're covered up in a disguise. And there's the reliance on chems. Over time, you become more and more feral unless you stave it off with chems. This comes with upsides and downsides. Ferals are stronger physically, but they lose some of their fine motor skills, so guns are harder to aim, but hitting someone with something becomes a lot more effective. After transforming, we can find Parthenia and actually learn a bit more about how she created the formula.
My
father was a general, stationed on site here at the silo. I was an adolescent bag of ailments. My health conditions kept me largely isolated and immobilized, and he was the only family I had, so I had an exception to stay here with him. Well, one day, the war happened, and everything went terribly, terribly wrong. There was a very loud noise, lots of distant panic in the other rooms, and then, well, I noticed it was very quiet. When I finally left my room, the place was empty. I guess everyone evacuated, or, well, I don't know. I was alone, like I had always been, taking care of myself, reading, learning, and now all of their military resources were at my disposal. Books, research documents, laboratory equipment. A whole new playground for knowledge. And most intriguingly, I found an assortment of chemicals ripe for experimentation. I soon found that one of these chemicals had fascinating effects on the human body. Regenerative effects. My analysis and experimentation with this chemical led to the highly functioning flesh chassis you see before you today. I ailed no longer. I was reborn! Fantastic, isn't it?
She was bedridden with an illness and was left in this place for a leaking warhead. Most likely the thing that set off the alarms, and her father was just a terrible person who left her behind. Luckily for her, they had some chemical capable of regenerating the human body, and between that and the radiation leaking, she turned herself into a ghoul. If we ask her about it, the documentation was mysteriously lacking. Almost as if the scientists were hiding they had it. We're left to theorize on what it could be, and the only thing that really makes any sense at this point is FEV. They had it at West Tech, so maybe some scientist was using it here for personal experiments for some unknown reason. So, just like Hardold, all we need is some FEV, and some radiation. Maybe it's the extreme dose of radiation, or the small, diluted amount of FEV that decides whether you become a ghoul or a super mutant. But all we know is once you're a ghoul, you no longer need to eat or drink. And you do become reliant on drugs to stave off going feral. For doing the questline, you even obtain something called the Fix, that removes a large part of your feral meter. The in-game model is a syringe, but given the medicine to change you into a ghoul was an inhaler, I assume that this will eventually become an aerosol as well, like we see in the TV show. And that's pretty much everything relevant to being and becoming a ghoul, but if you're confused, I'm not surprised. We've had ghouls die from dehydration. We've had ghouls live for incredible amounts of time without food. Take, for example, the other notable ghoul in Fallout 76. Hidden away in the basement of the Robco Research Center. Before the bombs dropped, they were experimenting with advanced interrogation tactics. Definitely not torture though. And in the locked room, stuck there for all these years, is a ghoul with no food or water, just walking around the same four walls. For the ghouls who do survive this long without food or water, it's possible they go into a kind of stasis. Take, for example, the ghoul from the show. When he's first brought into the picture, he's buried underground with an IV drip and only brought above ground around once a year. Well, in Fallout 2, we could get a request to rescue Coffin Willie, and when we find him, he's been buried in an unmarked grave for who knows how long. Turns out the people in New Reno don't like ghouls much. And again, with isolated ghouls in bunkers, we see those that should have starved, but haven't. Maybe they can slow their metabolism down enough that they can wait all these years, not moving in the dark, just waiting for something or someone to eat. We even see experiments across the games, pre-war civilians who were experimenting with immortality and became ghouls through long exposures to radiation and maybe in some cases other elements. Then why are ghouls so contradictory? Some can starve, some are immortal, others need chems to stay sane, and honestly I think it all just comes down to nature and nurture. Not everyone seems capable of turning into a ghoul, even if put in the exact same circumstances as other people who do turn. So DNA seems to have at least some role in the change. Maybe there's a gene that's needed, or it's just luck with how the cells break down from the radiation, mutating in different ways. And then we add in environmental factors, like being near a West Tech facility or some other source of FEV, which we've seen has had its own effect on the way ghouls transform. Those in an area would reasonably mutate similarly if they had the same environmental factors, though their DNA could affect the process. Paraphenia does talk about the difference in the change between natural ghouls and those who take a ghoulification process. Naturals change slowly over time, losing skin and body parts like teeth slowly, while those who use her medicine have a much more accelerated timescale, with all the changes coming much faster, which may even explain the need for the fix. If it is a much more accelerated process, then it makes sense that the effects on the brain would also be sped up, resulting in the user going feral faster, unless they take some more of the fix, which, as I mentioned, seems to increase their regeneration speed, repairing the parts of the brain that were being damaged. Now, this next bit is a bit out there, so don the tinfoil hats while we try and make this make sense. 76 and Paraphenia's fix are only 25-ish years after the bombs dropped. Maybe, at some point, it was discovered that the fix also works on normal ghouls to stop them turning feral. I can imagine most people, when faced with a complete loss of self, would be desperate to try anything. The fix works speeding up the regeneration, but also speeding up everything else. So turning feral comes back faster and faster each time, until they're completely reliant on it. Just like the ghoul in the TV show, and the 76 Vault Dwellers who decided to become feral. Over time, it spread from Appalachia and even to the west coast, where the ghoul population now rely on it to stave off turning feral. Of course, it might be something completely different for the ghoul. Here's hoping a season 2, whenever that comes out, we get some actual answers from some flashback scenes as to how the ghoul became the ghoul. It could answer a lot of questions. Finally, just in terms of mutations, it seems that the DNA plays a part in creating things like the glowing ones, as they definitely need an increased source of radiation, but not all ghouls found together will become glowing ones, though that could also be influenced by exposure to FEV. In scrapped content for Fallout 4, the glowing sea was meant to contain a giant glowing one. Now, this never actually made it into the game, but in the tabletop RPG expansion Winter of Atom, we do actually encounter a giant glowing one. I don't think it's a coincidence that both of them would have been glowing ones, needing the increased radiation to feed the growth. But I think the other factor would have been FEV. The other mutated race we know that's been bathed in FEV is the supermutants. And what happens when a supermutant is able to stay alive over a long period? They eventually grow and become behemoths. There's no set limit for how big these could be from what little we know. Maybe FEV and radiation eventually could cause creatures to become truly gigantic. Look at the Master. He was just a giant mass of flesh by the time he was ended, and he was still growing his unity. We also know from the Master searching for untainted Vault Dwellers that radiation exposure affects how FEV interacts with the brain, leaving those with large exposure to both barely brain dead. Which could explain feral ghouls and how over time they take in more radiation and become mindless. It'd also explain why we encounter so few sentient glowing ones. They've taken in the most radiation to become what they are, and as such, their brain has very seriously degraded. And of course, finally, there's the eldritch explanation that those who spend too long near an old god are changed, transformed into unthinking thralls who lurk in the dark passages by their gods' altars. Maybe the gods need an army, or maybe just being near them is all that causes the change. They give off a slight amount of radiation, usually nowhere near enough to ghoulify, but over long periods of time, it might be enough, though the change seems to happen fairly quickly for the guy from the Dunwich building. What do you think? FEV contamination? Long exposure to radiation? A different kind of mutation of the DNA, or even the start of an old god invasion? Let me know below and what you'd be interested in seeing me cover next. Atomites are on the list, but I'm also interested in Atomfall at the minute. Also, with the mention of a ghoul whale in Fallout 4, I do wonder how truly gigantic some of the creatures in the ocean grow to if they took in enough FEV and radiation. Not something we're likely to get info on, but fun to think about. Or not if you hate the ocean. If you enjoyed today's video, do all the usual stuff and sub for more content like this in the future. Also, join the Discord. We're starting to put together a little community over there and try and do community games on a Friday and a Saturday too. But for now, that's all, and be safe out there in the wasteland.